Hey everybody! Today we're going to create a nowhere space from scratch in Blender using Sketchfab as a source of 3D models and very rudimentary knowledge of how to navigate the Blender ecosystem. So, during this video I'm going to be using a few different plugins. The first of those is going to be the Nowhere Scene plugin. And you're going to want to have the latest version of this, which you can download in the guide. There'll be a link to the download somewhere near this video. Make sure you have the latest one, and make sure you have the latest one installed in Blender. One thing to note is before you install a new version of the plugin, you must install or uninstall, or remove the old version of the plugin. So before you go to install a new one, make sure you click the X or icon here and remove this old version of the plugin from Blender. I'm going to be using that for this video. I'm also going to be using a Sketchfab plugin, which will allow me to import Sketchfab models directly into Blender without downloading the model and importing through the File Explorer on Windows. It also allows you to have a little bit of a cleaner naming schema when you import these models. So it's just a nice plugin to have. You don't need it. It's just something I'll be using and you're going to see me use throughout the video. And the last plugin that I'm going to be using in this video is going to be my screencast plugin. So basically, I'm going to turn that on now, and every mouse click or key press that I do will be cast to the screen, so you guys can follow along with all the shortcuts and the different button presses that I'm doing to achieve the results that I do. So I'm going to turn that on right now, and this will be on for the rest of these tutorial videos. So, first thing that we're going to want to do when designing a nowhere space is to find some assets. And I've found some assets on Sketchfab already that are free to download and could make a really interesting nowhere space. This guy on Sketchfab here, he makes some really beautiful art that's low poly and a very unique art style, which we don't really have much of in Nowhere. So we're going to try to create a space using these assets, and maybe we will make something that's more, I don't want to say trippy. It doesn't have to be a traditional world, right? We can sort of get creative with what we use as rooms in different spaces. So we're going to try to create a space from scratch, be creative as possible, and make a simple space that'll be fun to explore in Nowhere. So using some of these models, we're going to start importing them. And the one I personally enjoy the most are the eggs. But I also think we need to have some sort of like grounding in reality for our world. And the one that calls my name for that is potentially this model. There's a table. There seems to be a skybox of sorts, which we could leave in there. We'll see what happens when we start playing around with it. And if we go click on it, we can see that it has, let's see, only 20,000 triangles, which is pretty good. So the download is going to be pretty light. So let's go ahead, and it's got a really cool art style. So let's go ahead and import this into Blender and start building out our 3D world. So I'm going to copy this link, and this is for using the Blender plugin for Sketchfab. But if you want to just download the model using this button right here, you can download either a blend, sometimes those are supplied, or you can download the GLTF file right here. And this GLTF file or GLB file will be able to be imported into Blender and exported using our Nowhere plugin. But I'm going to use the plugin inside of Blender, and I'm going to copy this link, which I already did. Go back to Blender. We'll go to the Sketchfab tab. We're going to import. I'll have to activate it just to sign in. It'll sign into my Sketchfab account. And we're going to import from a URL. You can also search directly on Sketchfab through this plugin, which we may end up doing at a later date. But we're going to check this box to import from URL, and we're going to paste our URL from Sketchfab. First, we're going to delete this cube, but let's import the model. After a quick little download, you'll see that our model has been imported. Now, this looks to be a little small, so let's just scale this up by a factor of 10 by hitting S and then typing 10. And then we'll see that our entire model that we just imported, called Fiesta T, has been blown up by 10 times its original size, which is what we want. So now we can go ahead and we can check out these models individually, what it looks like. And right now, We are in viewport shading mode without textures, right? So this is just like the mode where we're going to see the mesh, but we're not going to see any of the texturing or UV layouts. But in order to see what this is going to look like in world, we can just go over to the unlit section, and these textures will start loading in. And if we go over to the lit section, we're going to see similar results, and we can start to understand why if we click on one of these models and potentially let's select the apple, okay? And we can go into the shading tab. And inside the shading tab, we can start to understand what's going on with these textures, and we can start understanding whether or not they're going to be compatible with GLTF. So what we have here is a material output shader that seems to be just a mix shader and emission shader of this base color. Now, this is fine, but this is not optimal for GLTF, although it will work. So we could just leave these, and in nowhere this should show up and work as intended. So for now, let's just leave them. And at a later point in the video, we're going to come back around to this, and we can either convert these to a PBR shader type, or we can convert them to a background shader, which is a really light and clean way to make sure that your textures show up exactly as they do in their images in world. Like a background shader will make sure that the texture you are using on the mesh in world does not take any light whatsoever and is just exactly as it should be represented, one-to-one for colored. It is not affected by the scene lighting at all, which a lot of times you may want, and that allows for really lightweight scenes without dynamic lighting and baked lighting that, in a way, is baking your lighting into the scene. And this is, you can even use baked light maps as background textures if you wanted to handle it that way. But long story short, there's multiple ways to handle this material node tree. But for now, we'll leave it, and we'll come back to this, and we'll go through some experimentation, and I'll show you what the different types of shader trees and output nodes we can use. So going back to this, you can see that we have a sphere, and it looks like we got backface calling on the sphere, which we do. So if we turn that off, you're not going to be able to see inside. But we want that on. Pretty good. For now, at least, we think. And if this is going to be our main world, we should add in a player spawn point just for scale. And we're going to add all the rest of the nowhere specific entities after we do this particular spawn point. But this is just for when we're building the world, we need a scale reference. So let's pop our cursor here, and let's add in a player spawn point in the nowhere plugin. So if we just go to the entities tab and click player, and a player will spawn in right here. And if I hit G to grab it, which will let me move it around, but I want to lock it to the y-axis, we just click z-axis with Z, and we can move it up and down. And we want to place it somewhere just like that, right? That sounds about right. Maybe we want to scale this up a little bit by a factor of 1.25. We can grab our player spawn point, we can bring it back up, bring it over. This gives you more room to have people running around this. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good size-wise. So now we have this scene laid out, and we have some space for people to walk around and mingle on the table. You can go in the coffee cup. We could potentially let people go inside the teacup. Let's see what it looks like inside it. It's not completely finished, but it's cool. We could add something different in here eventually. That could be a cool little Easter egg or mystery people could find. But I think we do need to add some more. And one thing we could do is make this scene. Let's see. What do we want to do? I know we want to, or at least I would like to import some of these other cool illustrations from the Sketchfab artist. And especially these eggs. These eggs are my favorite. We gotta figure out what to do with those. And let's just go ahead and import them and we start playing around with what we can do with those. For now, I'm going to hide this sphere, I think. I don't know if I'm going to want that in the final product. I think this might just be a cool little base station to start basing everything off of. And we can build around it. So I'm going to import the eggs. We'll just import them, scale them up, make them a similar size, and figure out where we want these to be placed. And this is where we really start thinking about what certain meshes and places in this world we're building. I know it's very abstract and weird, but what are they going to be used for? I could see these eggs being used as almost a dance club, with each level having different music on it and a different vibe. And that could just be like the club area where the table is a meeting area. And you can start thinking about this with your own worlds and be creative with what certain rooms are. Like, rooms don't have to be rooms with 4 walls and a ceiling and floor. It can be anything. You can mess with scale. You can mess with perspective. You can just be completely abstract. There's so many endless possibilities for what we can do world building wise, and I think this GLTF update and all the new added features of the plugin and animation and the stepped animation system is going to really unlock some really cool creative control for you guys. So now we have these eggs in here. I'm thinking that's a good enough scale, especially we're going to have people trying to hang out on them. Maybe let's make it a little bigger, right? If that's going to be a nightclub or club with music on each floor. Yeah, let's try that and see what happens. This middle one could be a slide. I don't know, we're gonna have to play around with it. But let's leave that there for now. We also have to be very cautious of our triangle count and file size. And we're gonna end up optimizing this world at the end of the video, or end of this part of the particular video. But right now I can already see that we added a bunch of triangles just from this egg model. Now we can just turn it on and off by holding shift and clicking the eyeball. But you can see down in the right hand corner down here, we go from 142,000 triangles to 20,000 triangles. So this is 120,000 triangles inside this egg model, which is it's a lot for what it is. And we could probably minimize the amount of triangles in this mesh. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this and we're going to actually organize pretty well. So let's just I don't think I'm gonna mess with the actual composition of the mesh itself within each other. So in order to make decimation easy, I'm gonna try merging all of these meshes together. So I'm gonna select the hierarchy, and I'm going to join them. So I need to click on a mesh. Okay, I'm gonna join them. So I click either Control J or right click join. And this should all come down to one mesh now, which is right here, object 5, and let's just call it eggs. And we can Alt P, clear parent, keep transform. Come over here, now we have eggs. We can just delete this entire hierarchy. And now we have our eggs model over here, and we can add a modifier to our eggs. There's a modifier tab, and we can decimate. Whoopsies, wrong one. We can decimate these eggs. I'm going to pull our ratio of triangles down from 120 faces to, until you start seeing a noticeable difference. Obviously, that's way too much. Still too much. So probably a little too much. Pull it back up just to remember what it looked like before. I'm not seeing much of a change. I'm not seeing much of a change. Starting to see a change a little bit. We want to pull this down just enough where we're not really sacrificing visual fidelity, but we're getting much higher poly count. Or lower, I'm sorry. We want a much lower poly count. I'm going to pull this down. I don't see too much. We're seeing some cracking in the mesh. Let's try 0.25. Not bad. Mesh still looks good. We can go ahead and we'll leave the modifier now for now. We're not going to apply it just in case you make changes later, but eventually we're going to apply those modifiers and that mesh will be decimated for good, especially on the export. All right. So now that we have these two meshes in here, let's add a few more. This looks like nothing special, but it looks like it could be a pretty cool scene. Now we want to make sure that our triangle count is relatively small, and as small as we can make it. We rated a decimation on the eggs, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to take this modifier, we're going to click on the eggs, which has a decimate modifier applied. Now we're going to click on all the rest of our meshes, which we'd like to decimate. Control L, and we're going to Control L, and we're going to copy modifiers. Now make sure this is a selected one. We're going to I did it the wrong way because I had the selected object as one with no modifiers, and I got rid of the modifiers on the eggs. So I'm going to hit Control Z a few times. And now this egg will have a modifier back on it. I'm going to make sure we have the egg selected. Then I'm going to hit Control L, copy modifiers. So now each one of these meshes I just clicked had a 25% decimation applied to it. Now I'll go to each one. We'll have to just go through and make sure that we're not losing too much fidelity in the model. Right there, obviously we are. I think we could actually not decimate as much on this one and keep some of the fidelity of it. So let's keep this maybe. Move on. Let's just make sure we can combine these models. I select the hierarchy. That's our watermelon plate. So we can delete this actually. But if I go to the Fiesta T and select the hierarchy, and click on the table, we want to join this as well, just so we can do a nice easy decimation job. Although, if we just turn this on and off, we can see that it's only about 20,000 triangles. So maybe let's not do that. Let's do everything separate. We don't really need to decimate this, as it's only 20,000 triangles for that entire table, and that's probably worth it just to keep it as is. We really don't want this. I don't. You know what? Maybe let's scale it up. Scale it up by 100. Now let's scale it by 10. And we can go to our view parameters and change our clip end length to like 10,000 so you can see everything. It's not a bad look. It's cool. If we leave this, it removes the need to have an environment map inside of nowhere. So basically, a good way to optimize the scene might be to not have an environment map at all. And this is where we might start moving on to some materials. And in this instance, we want all of this lighting information that's already baked into the textures to come through. We don't really need nowhere to light the scene at all. That's already done. So what we can do is we can let all of these materials materials either exist as emissive textures as they currently are, or we can turn them into background textures, or convert them to PBR textures and still keep that emissive element to them. But I think the best route here would be using straight background textures. But we're going to do an example of each just to show how they're interchangeable and how each one works shortly. So now that we have our base mesh somewhat set, I don't know, we have different areas for people to explore. We can put content frames in different places. Could be cool. Things can change as we move on. But for now, this looks like it could be fun. I think maybe we should rotate this eggplant. Let's turn it upside down. So let's try rotating it on the y-axis by 90 degrees, negative 90 degrees. Maybe a little more, just so we can have a flat zone right there for people to stand on. So that can be another club right here. Make it even this way too, on the x-axis, just so it's flat for everybody over here. Maybe we should do the same thing for each of these, right? So there's at least one flat section that you can go to hang out. The banana, we'll make sure that that's flat right here. We can click the Y. Viewpoint thingy to align your view. I'm gonna make sure that's even. Eggs are gonna be, eggs are gonna be cool. You're gonna be able to slip around. It'll be a fun place to go explore and have fun. Sweet. And let's make sure that these are also flat, just so people don't slip and slide around. We'll rotate on the Y. On the Y. You see? Okay. Whatever. Pretty good, I think. Cool. So now let's move into configuring the materials. We've already decimated the mesh and optimized that for web, but we want to now make sure that these materials are compatible with GLTF, and we want to make sure that they're as small of material files as we can make them. So the first step in this process is going to be to start inspecting what these materials currently look like. So let's click on this outside sphere, which will be our modified skybox. And if we click on the shading tab, we can start to see this shading tree down here. Now, as it is, we just have a base color as an emissive texture going into a mixed shader node with material output. We could try and see and look how this exports into Nowhere, but two ways we know work in Nowhere are either using background shaders or using a PBR shader, and that's what we're going to encourage you guys to do, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do in this video. So I'm going to take this material, and we're going to rename it Skybox, because we want to be very clear as to what we're working with, especially when it comes to like material and texture names. It can be confusing, especially when you're baking lighting and doing other complex things. So instead of using a mix shader, we're going to click that and click background. Disconnect that first, and then click background. So we still have this base color in here, and all we're going to do is connect the color to the background color, and boom. Now this material is going to show up in Nowhere and not be impacted by the lighting of the scene whatsoever. We can also check out over here what the dimensions of the image are. Oops, oopsie daisies. If you go to image and you just go to resize, you can see the 2048 by 2048. That's fine, especially for our skybox, but from some of these other textures, we might be able to compress those down. We're not going to mess with the texture resolution or size until we see how big of an export this is actually going to give us at the end. So now that we have this one material done, we sort of want to rinse and repeat and do this for all of them. So if you click on the eggs, you see a bunch of different materials here. And all we're going to want to do is click on each one, and we're going to end up disconnecting this emissive shader right here, changing it to a background type, and in this instance, we're going to take the hex value, copy and paste it over to our background node. Now we have the background node that will look, or background texture that will look exactly the same and not be affected by the lighting in the scene at all. We can do the same thing for egg whites. We just disconnect. So as you can see, the eggs look very similar. And we removed a lot of these needless nodes in this node tree. Now, maybe for the eggplant, we're going to change this into a PBR shader. And in order to do that, instead of making it a mix shader, we're going to go over here and click Diffuse BSDF. Before we do that, again, let's disconnect this node so it doesn't get wiped out. And we're going to go ahead and click Diffuse BSDF. I'm sorry, not Diffuse BSDF, Principled BSDF. And you get a node that looks just like this. This Principled BSDF node is what is used to apply all of these different, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that, a lot of these different alterations you can make to how the material is going to look in the exported world file. Certain things like IQR, IOR is not going to come. Things like specular, metallic, roughness, those will. So here, we're just going to take our base color and connect that to color. Now, typically, we could just only do this. And we'd be like, okay, that's fine. But if you go to a lit scene, it's going to be darker than everything else. So in order to have things not be affected by the lighting in the scene, using a Principled BSDF shader, we can also connect the color to our emissive. So now this will have an emission the same color as its diffuse color, and it will not be affected. It will be affected by the lighting, but it will also be lit itself. So you don't need external lighting, and if you have no external lighting, then this will look similar to what a background shader will look like. But if you do have lighting, this will still take on more lighting, where a background texture will not. Looks like there's some alpha transparency going on as well. So in this instance, let's use a Principled BSDF shader. So we're going to just disconnect you here and disconnect you here. And we're going to use nodes, but we're going to make it a Principled BSDF shader. Pull this over. We're going to connect color to color. We're going to connect color to emission. We're going to connect alpha to alpha. And we're going to make sure that it is a alpha blend file type. And we're going to show the back. Perfect. Sounds great. So now we're going to move on to the next material in line, the white one. We're just going to disconnect. This is easy enough. Another one is going to be background shader. Boom, color to color. Done. Yellow, background shader. Color to color. Done. Line another funky one. We don't need any of this. We just need line art base color. There's this. I don't know why it's, yeah. Okay. And this one, slightly different. White our base color. Yeah, one of them's white, one of them's not. Okay. So be it. So we're going to take this one and do the same thing as the first one. So just disconnect. Connect this. I'm going to change this to a principled BSDF. We're going to move the color to color, and we're going to move color to emission, and we're going to move alpha to alpha, and we're going to make sure we have the alpha blend file going on here, and we have our banana all set and ready to go. The last ones we should be doing here are going to be these ones. So we're going to have to do the same for each part of the table, which is okay. So table base color has both alpha and color, so we're going to use a principled BSDF on this one. We're going to plug our color base color. We're going to plug our emission into emission. We're going to plug our alpha into alpha. We're going to make sure it is a alpha blend file, and we're good to go. We do not. We do want to turn on backface culling. Backface culling is on. We can try to export this and see what happens inside of nowhere as well. So I'm going to leave one of these as is, but that's how you configure PBR shaders and how you configure background materials. I can go configure these materials at a later time if need be. They might end up showing up fine as long as these mix shaders and camera array. I don't think the camera array light path node is going to work in a GLTF format. So I have a feeling I'm going to have to come back and edit these. We're going to leave it just for an experiment and to show you guys what happens if you do not change out your materials to PBR or background types. Cool. I think that's really it as far as like a world build goes. Are creating the 3D assets for the file. We're down to 124,000 triangles, which is pretty small. And we don't have that many materials, but we can check and see how many we actually have. So there's not many, and we can trim these down if need be, but this is a fine amount. We'll see what the final file size is when we export for the first time, but we can always just crush down texture resolutions. But for now, let's keep this as our main world build, and we can move on to some of the features of the plugin.